Late afternoon, I will call to order the State of Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council's Planning and Procedure Subcommittee to order. Today is Tuesday, December 10, 2024. I would ask that the record reflect the committee members that are present, as well as the CRMC staff that are present here for this particular matter. First matter before us will be approval of the minutes. Those minutes being from September 24, 2024. I know they've been disseminated. I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes, please.
Move approval.
A motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. The old business or works in progress?
There are none, Mr. Chair.
All right. Brings us to our one matter, number 4, advance notice of proposed rulemaking on a petition for promulgation of rules, parentheses, and possible action. Petition of presentation in the matter of 2024-04-071 Quidnessett Country Club. Petition for change to map of water type classification for North Kingston, parentheses, north. And I would ask, is the applicant present this evening?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Good evening, Attorney Main. Come forward, please. Prior to your presentation, I'm just going to ask councils or our committees, Attorney DeSisto, to just state on the record to streamline what the application is for and the evidence that we are to consider.
The petitioner in this matter is the Quidnessett Country Club, and their petition is for a change to the map of water type classifications, and that is for North Kingston in parentheses north. What that means is at issue is a change in the water type. So your presentation tonight should really be focused on that, focused on the water as opposed to other matters, which the subcommittee has already heard in terms of economic impact and things of that nature. So if you could confine it to that discrete issue, which is the subject at hand, that would be most appreciated.
We will do that. Thank you for that guidance.
Thank you. And with that, you can proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, we will abide by Attorney DeSisto's guidance here. Tonight, I have 3 witnesses to present, and I understand that this is a presentation, not a hearing. The 3 witnesses are Joe Klinger from Ecotones. Joe's presentation will be the longer of the 3. The next witness will be Tim Garish, who is a golf course architect. And the 3rd witness is Mr. Abe Cohen from Bayview at Scalabrini, which is that land area just north of Quidnessett. So if I may begin, Mr. Chair, and also reserve a few minutes at the end for some closing comments.
That's fine.
Excellent. Joe? Joe will be our first presenter. I don't know if you want him sworn in.
In case people ask questions.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Joseph Klinger, JOSEPH KLINGER.
Joe, if you stand over more by the screen, grab the clicker. We're going to rely on a PowerPoint presentation on the water type request that we have here. I have extra copies of the slide presentation. If anyone would like one during the presentation, just please let me know. So without further ado, Joe, I want you to tell the subcommittee very briefly, because many of them have seen you before, what your professional and educational background are.
I'm a Vice President and Principal Environmental Scientist with Ecotones Incorporated. I've been there for 22 years. Prior to that, I was a Senior Project Scientist at Bar Engineering. And before that, I was a coastal geologist with the CRMC working on policy and planning.
And Joe, did you do any work for Quidnessett Country Club that is the subject of this meeting this evening?
Yes, I authored the petition.
And please describe briefly what the petition is.
So the petition is a request to change a portion of the water type on the subject property from type 1 to type 2. And the purpose is to afford some additional flexibility to addressing erosion concerns in the shoreline in this area.
So Joe, could you use that first slide here and show the area where the regulatory request, this was the request for the regulatory changes from type 1 water to type 2 water?
Sure. So this is the golf course here at Quidnessett Country Club. This is the Bayview facility to the north. And the proposed type change is this green highlighted area here.
And Joe, briefly describe the basis of the petition.
So the basis of the petition has three main parts. First, that originally this area was not natural in its natural condition or undisturbed. Secondly, that the adjacent land use is developed recreation and residential uses. And that intensity of those uses have only increased over time on both the Quidnessett property and the Bayview property as well. And the third part of the petition is looking at examples around the state that are consistent with these type 2 designations.
And when you say that the area for your first basis for the petition was not natural and undisturbed, is there any temporal element to that?
Yeah, so we looked at the development of the golf course prior to the program, then looked at what was going on as the program was developed, and then things that changed after the program.
And please define program when you say that.
The Coastal Resources Management Program, which we often call the RED.
Okay. And what time frame are you talking about? What years?
So the Red Book was became regulation in 1983, but we look back at earlier versions of that were being worked on in the mid to late 70s.
All right. And when you say 1983, you're talking about when the water type classifications came out, correct?
When they became law regulation.
Okay. So, Joe, you've used a lot of terms in the basis for the petition, including water type classification. Let's unpack that a minute. What do you mean by water type classification?
So CRMC has 6 water type designations around the bay, around the whole state, starting from type 1 to type 6. And this is analogous to municipal zoning regulations, where in a town or a city, you might have like a residential zone where you can build a house or have a subdivision, but in those areas, you couldn't build a chemical manufacturing plant, for example. So in the coastal zone, it's the same kind of idea where type 1 areas, the standards are most restrictive, and type 6 areas are least restrictive.
So you've used the terminology type 1 and type 2, as mentioned in the petition. What's the definition of type 1 water under the CRMC regulations and the definition of type 2 waters under the regulations?
Okay, we'll look at that, but I'd like to go back to the purpose of the petition,
Sure.
which was to try and have some more flexibility with the erosion. So we just wanted to demonstrate some pictures of the bluff. These 2 pictures were from the end of 2022, where there was a series of storms that eroded most of the bluff. And this was protected with non-structural shoreline protection previously. That all got washed away. This is the golf course, the cart path that's on the seaward side of the 14th green and the 15th tee. So that was the first image I wanted to show. And then this is looking more south-southeast from about the same area, again, showing that all the non-structural stuff got washed away, and you can see the fence at the golf cart path moving to the ocean.
Before you move into the definitions of type 1 and type 2 water, I just wanted to find for the record that these pictures are from Quidnessett Country.
Yes.
Okay. Continue.
So if we go back to the water types, again, it's the activities on the adjacent mainland that are the prime determinant of the water type designation. We have we're concerned with 2 water types, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 are conservation areas that are in natural undisturbed conditions, where type 2 are low intensity use areas, which still can be highly scenic, but they support low intensity residential recreational and residential uses.
So before you move off that slide, Joe, let's focus on the first quote that you have there about the adjacent mainland uses. How does CRMC determine the water classifications?
So again, they look at the activities on the adjacent mainland, and then that drives what water type it would be.
Okay. So, Joe, did you do any research to determine how CRMC determined the water types throughout the state, and particularly off of Quidnessett?
Yes, we did. We first filed a request with the agency to see if there was any information on the methodology, and there was nothing available. So I went to the Pella Marine Science Library at the Graduate School of Oceanography at URI to see if there were supporting documents or old versions of the program that could help us understand what the methodology appeared to be.
So this would be documentation that CRMC was using before 1983, is that correct?
Correct.
And did you bring any of that documentation with you tonight?
Yeah, I brought different versions of the program that go back to 1976, but also looked at some studies from 1975 all the way through 1978.
Okay, and these are primary source materials from the Pell Library at URI?
Yes,
And they speak to how the water type classifications were done in Rhode Island leading up to the regulations in 1983, correct?
yes, they help us understand it.
Okay, so please walk us through any research that you've done as far as the adjacent mainland uses in the Quidnessett area.
So the first thing we did is we looked at aerial photographs from 1939 through the mid-70s to 1983 when the program was established. And then later on, we looked at more recent photos, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And so this aerial photograph is from either 1951 or 1952, and it shows the area, Quidnessett area. This is the golf course today. Clubhouse is about there. This is the Bayview facility. That's the original hospital up there. So our petition area, this area, the upper right of the slide. So in the early 1950s, this area was an agricultural field. Obviously, we can't see a golf course, so the golf course hadn't been developed yet. So if we move forward in time about a decade, we see things starting to change. The golf course is starting to be developed. The front nine is been constructed. This is the pool being excavated right there. But up in the northeastern section of the course, that's still under construction. We can still see the Bayview Hospital here, and we'll talk about the expansion of that later on. So what's important here is in 1962, the front nine was constructed, and the back nine in the northeast of the course was starting to be worked on. And we can see that in these bright white areas. That's all earthwork, grading, and removal of sandy soil to contour the golf course so that it would look like what it looks like today.
And again, that dark area to the right of the aerial photograph, what is that?
This is Narragansett Bay.
Okay, and again, up in that top area is where the petition seeks the water type change, correct?
Right.
Okay, please continue.
So if we go another 10 years ahead, this is 1972. So we're getting to when the program was starting to be established or developed. And we see continued earthwork working on this northeast section, the back nine of the course. The earthwork is moving north out to the shoreline, and there's lots of paths through here. The pool house has been constructed. This is the early clubhouse and one of the parking areas that have been established. So this is ultimately the northeast part of the golf course was completed in 1974. So this photograph is a snapshot of what it looked like before that was developed. And then if we move ahead, this is 1978. So again, the northeast portion of the course was completed in 1974, but we have a 1972 and a 1978 photograph that kind of brackets that. So if we look on the 1978, we see that the earthwork is completed, back nines installed. There's the clubhouse, the pools, tennis courts, and that northern parking area. So this kind of brackets that completion. And again, this is 1978, and that's when the sort of the final initial program was accepted by the federal government with a federal environmental impact statement accepted.
And again, Joe, the area where the water type requests the change from type 1 to type 2, that's in the top portion of that aerial, correct?
Yeah, the top right, it actually goes off the screen to the north on this area.
Toward Bayview, correct?
Yeah.
And by Bayview, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and there are sand traps and holes depicted in that northern area, correct?
Right, so this is the 14th green here, and those white areas are the sand traps around that. And then the T for the 15th hole is right to the north of that.
And so this is a good 5 years before the regulations on water type change.
Yes.
So, Joe, in
Excuse me.
doing your research
Mr. Chair,
about,
Yes.
how- of
What do you mean?
Sorry.
Executive Director Willis has a question.
course,
can you just back up and explain what you saw the regulations were in the 78 program?
there weren't regulations yet in the 78 program on water type classification.
Sure about that?
We've researched it and there are early data that Joe's going to get into in a moment on what was available back in the 70s. And then the regulations that we're looking at today were somewhere circa early 1980s, working off of what Joe's going to show you in a moment.
Thank you.
Okay.
I can further clarify that there were water type designations in those earlier programs, which were revised and changed in 1980.
Continue.
So after we looked at the aerial photographs and we recognized that there was earthwork going on, we wanted to further see, was there other corroborating evidence that there was, that the property was not in a natural undisturbed condition at the time. So we took, this is the same 1972 aerial photograph with natural resource conservation surface soil mapping units overlaid on top of that. And what's important here is this highlighted unit labeled UD. UD is Udorthan's urban land complex. Udorthan's, that's spelled UDORTHENTS, which is a funny word for just a soil that's been cut or filled 2 feet or more. And that's also associated with urban land. So we just lump this together in a unit we call UD. And what's significant about that, again, it's an area that's been disturbed by cutting or filling by 2 feet or more. And that is often done to build up or level recreational areas for like development.
And again, Joe, just to give a time frame for this, when again is this aerial photograph? What's the date of
The
it?
aerial photograph is 1972.
Okay. And the different demarcations on it, the orange circle, the UV, et cetera. Did you put those on that slide?
I overlaid the natural resources conservation service data on top of the aerial photograph.
Okay, but the designation of UD, that is not from you, correct?
Correct,
It's from
that's
the
from
government
The
agency.
USDA.
Okay.
So looking at more of the history, we went back to historic topographic, USGS topographic mapping. And this map is a 1957 topographic map that was photo revised in 1973. And all the photo revisions are, shown in these purple colors. So when the USGS scientist that was doing the photo revision looked at this area, he saw that same excavation area, those bright white areas we were seeing on the 72 photograph. And they revised the topographic map to include this cross shovel symbol, which is a symbol for a gravel pit, a borrow pit. So that just further adds to the evidence that the amount of earthwork was going on. And then when we're looking at this, we looked at the original topography. These contour lines, these brownish yellow lines show the original contours. And then we overlaid on top of that more recent 2011 topography. And we can see that they're cutting across each other. So that demonstrates that we've had at least 10 feet of excavation, maybe close to 20, but there's a little bit of error in what we're doing with them. So.
And again, Joe, relate that excavation area that you're talking about to where you are at Quidnessett Country Club.
So here's the creek, Spitz Creek, and the wetland associated with it. This is the Bayview area. It used to be called the Scalabrini home. So our petition area is up here to the east and north of the gravel pit and the grading and that UD soil unit I just showed you on the previous slide.
And that gravel pit and grading was depicted on the earlier aerials that you showed the subcommittee, correct?
Correct.
So, Joe, we talked briefly about the research you did at the Pell Library on some of the primary source materials to the older versions of the CRMC program. What did you find with your research?
So when we looked at the older versions of the program, we found that there was significant mapping and some methodology that was put forth that allowed us to kind of understand what the method was. So in the 1970s, 77 and 78 versions, there were large pulled out map of land use around the bay. This is called priority for use in the Rhode Island coastal region. And associated with that was a methodology, the map preparation, that is a flow chart that fits us into these different designations, which we'll look at in a little bit more detail. But in the introduction of that program, it states that the priorities of use for Rhode Island coastal region, this map illustrates the application of the coastal management program and provides a visual bridge between legislative priorities and specific council policies and regulations. So this appeared to be a very important map that we spent a lot more time looking at.
And Joe, to me, that map looks pretty contemporary. When was that map created?
This map was somewhere in the mid to late 70s. This came out of the 77 coastal program, and it's also referred to in the 78 program, and in what I think is the final 78 that had the federal environmental impact statement incorporated with it.
And again, Joe, just for the record, who prepared that map and for whom?
The map is prepared by the Coastal Resources Center at the University of Rhode Island for the Coastal Resources Management Council.
That map's pretty tough to read, so do you have a better picture of it?
Yeah, we'll look at a couple versions of this at different scales so we can understand it better. First, I'd like to just kind of highlight some of the flow chart part and how that relates to the legend of the map. So during the methodology, all the different land uses, the different colors on the map were identified and then attributed to a designation. So high intensity development was this dark orange, low to medium, another orange. And then we go through, we have recreation areas, conservation, rural land, and so on. So this map split up all the land use adjacent to the coast and leads into our designations. So this is the same map, but I blew up the legend. I'm not sure it's still legible from here, but it gives you a better sense of what we're talking about. So if we look at different areas of the state, if we go up to the Port of Providence here, that's that dark orange color, which is high intensity development. Whereas if we go down to Charlestown down here and all these yellow areas, those are rural lands. So these are the different land uses adjacent to the coast. What's important is that the land use was analyzed between 1.5 miles inland to 7.5 miles inland, with some kind of average around 2 miles inland from the coast.
So you're talking about, let's put this together. You're talking about the land uses adjacent to the coast, but what does that mean for the water type classifications?
Well, if we go back to those definitions, and it's the adjacent mainland activities that are the prime determinant of the water type designations, it's this type of land use analysis that gets us to those designations.
Just let's do an easy one. Let's talk about the Port of Providence. Why don't you give an example using the Port of Providence?
Right, again, in the Port of Providence, that's going to be high intensity development, which would equate to what is now a type 6 water. So if we zoom into the area that we're talking about for the petition, this is the same map just blown up to show, this is Quidnessett here, the green area. The blue area, so green is recreation on our legend, that's the golf course. To the east, we have a blue area, that's conservation land, that's the Tibet's Creek Wetland Complex. And to the south, we have the Mount View neighborhood, which is medium to low intensity development. And to the north, we have the Bayview facility, which is also medium low intensity development. So we have developed recreation with abutting residential areas. So it should have been type 2 waters initially.
And why is that? Why should it have been type 2?
For two reasons. First of all, we showed that it wasn't in a natural undisturbed condition and that the adjacent mainland uses are developed recreation and residential, not conservation areas.
Continue.
So once we looked at the program and we established that there was a disturbance, it wasn't natural and undisturbed, and we had adjacent land uses that were consistent with type 2 designations, we looked at what changed since the program was enacted. So this aerial photograph is 1984, so a year after the regulations became enacted. And we can see again the general configuration of the course as we know it today.
Let me pause you on that. Is the configuration of the course that you see in this 1984 aerial similar to what you saw in the aerials from the late 1970s?
Yes.
Okay. And again, it's for that top part of the aerial where the water type change from 1 to 2 is being sought, correct?
Yes, from about this area and going north, and again, it goes north off of this line.
And toward and by Bayview at Scalabrini?
Yes.
Okay, continue, please.
So there was a couple fires at the club that predated the program, and the current clubhouse was constructed in 1984, just after the program was developed. And at this time, we have a larger southern parking lot, and that northern one's expanded, but generally speaking, it's the same configuration from 1978. Is pretty much what is the configuration today?
In 2024?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So the next thing we looked at was, again, on our second key point was what were the adjacent mainland land use activities and did they change over time? This aerial photograph is from 2008 and it captures a lot of things that happened after the 1983 program was enacted. So again, here's the course. Here's the course. The petition area is up here. There's the original Bayview Hospital, the Scalabrini Hospital. Here's the 1984 clubhouse that exists today. And then in 1988, 4 condominiums were constructed, 4 buildings were constructed on the west side of Eagle Drive. That was 7 residences and 14 bedrooms. And then in 2002, a series of 9 additional condo buildings, which was 32 or 36 residences and 89 bedrooms were added to the south here. And then the following year in 2003, on the east side of Eagle Drive, an additional 4 condominium units were added. Again, 7 residences, 14 bedrooms. So in total, that added 117 bedrooms to this property. And shortly, well, sort of in between, that was what was going on at Quidnessett. At the Bayview property in 1994, the facility doubled in size with the construction of these buildings here, which added 120 bedrooms to the facility. And then in 2006, because of some erosion problems, the club installed some non-structural shoreline protection in the petition area, which was subsequently washed away, and we'll talk more about that.
Right. So talk to us a little bit more about what happened at Bayview in the 1990s.
Right, so like I said, we can see on this photograph, if we go back to the prior photo, I'm sorry. But these buildings were new in 1994. Okay? And then we looked into what were the implications of that. And this is a portion of the site plan for the septic system for the additional 120 bedroom units. So just to orient ourselves, this is Narragansett Bay here. This is the coastal feature, the 200-foot jurisdictional area. Those are the new buildings in 1994 with all the earthwork relative to stormwater management. And then this is the rather large septic system that was needed to be installed to serve as an institutional 120 bedroom facility.
Joe, before you get off of this admittedly very busy slide, you noted Narragansett Bay, the coastal feature. How far is the tip of the building to the coastal feature? In other words, but what's the distance between the coastal feature and the nearest point on a building there?
So again, this dashed line here, that's 200 feet from the coastal feature. That's about another 50 feet plus or minus. So the building's about 250 feet from the feature.
And Joe, does the petition for the water type change from 1 to 2 come by that building at Bayview?
Yeah, so this is, Quidnessett's right down here, the northern section of Quidnessett Country Club. This is the Bayview property all the way up here. So our petition is this whole rectangular area, and in this case, it extends south off the slide as opposed to the others that extended north off the slide.
Excellent. Please continue.
So moving ahead in time, in 2013, so I talked about in 2006, there was non-structural shoreline protection installed, which was smaller coir coconut fiber envelopes that were installed and then subsequently eroded away. Post Hurricane Sandy, and a newer non-structural shoreline protection program was installed with these really massive coir envelopes, or we refer to them mostly as burritos, which took pretty significant heavy equipment to install them in the bluff, and then rock was moved from the beach to create a tow armor along the base of that structure. Then all of this was subsequently, this is when we got the storms in 2022, these were all washed away.
And just to complete the record on that, where you see these larger burritos, is that where there is a wall now?
Correct.
Continue.
Okay, so we looked at the soil disturbance of the original site. We looked at the adjacent land uses adjacent to the main, on the adjacent mainland. And then we wanted to look at examples around the state of other type 2 areas. So just to get us oriented again, here's that 1977, 1978 land use map with the green recreation of the club, the adjacent residential development, and the wetland conservation area. And then this is a 2024 aerial photograph with the current designations. And we can see the Mount View type 2 residential here. There's the golf course, the recreational. And even at this scale, we can see the development, the expanded development at Bayview in this area. So based on the original disturbance, it shouldn't have been type 1 in the first place. And then the adjacent mainland activities are consistent with type 2. And then as we go forward in time, those intensities have only increased, suggesting it should be type 2.
So Joe, have you looked at other areas around our 400 miles of coastline where there's water type classifications to see if there are any comparisons to draw to Quidnessett and Bayview?
Yeah, we looked at different types of areas, just looking around the bay at type 2 areas in general. And then we also compared them to other golf courses that abutted Narragansett Bay. So this is the first example over in Bristol Portsmouth area. So here's the Mount Hope Bridge. Mount Hope Bridge, again, that's that early land use mapping. And we see a recreational area, the green color, that's Montauk Country Club, with wetlands to the north along Mount Hope Bay and residential areas to the east and the west. If we look at this, these two aerial photographs are at the same scale. Quidnessett areas on the top right and Montauk's on the bottom right. Here's the Montauk Golf Course, recreational, developed recreation, with residential areas to the northeast and also to the west, with condominium units that are very similar to the 9 that were constructed in 2002 at Quidnessett. And then there's a tidally influenced wetland system in here, somewhat similar to Town Pond. And then when we look at the designation, this whole area is type 2.
And has it always been type 2 at Montauk
Yes.
Country Club? Do you have any other examples that you found to compare back to Quidnessett?
Yeah, so again, looking around the bay, we We looked at an area south of the Jamestown Bridge on the west side of the West Passage, where there's residential area. And then there's a small wetland complex that's Casey Point, Saunderstown, North Kingstown. Again, these two aerial photographs are at the same scale. So we have residential areas, residential institutional areas abutting Quidnessett. Here we have what looks like lower intensity residential development with maybe medium density residential development with conservation land in between and some wetland. So this was never developed and it's been conserved. It's also a tidally influenced wetland system. This is also designated type 2.
Any other examples?
So those were more general examples, but then when we first started looking at this, we wanted to look at golf courses to try and compare things more equitably. So this is a Warwick Country Club that's up on Warwick Neck just north of Quidnessett. So you can actually see this from Quidnessett when you're at the 14th green or the 15th tee. And so here's the golf course surrounding residential land use, some forested land, and this whole area is designated type 2.
And have the waters off of Warwick Country Club always been designated as type 2?
Yes.
Continue, please.
Looking at other golf courses, this is the Quidnessett Club that used to be Carnegie Abbey. And this has a really interesting mosaic of land uses, many of which that are also represented in the Quidnessett area. So we have the golf course here. With the golf course here, different types of residential development, some institutional, somewhat similar to Bayview. And then again, another tidally influenced wetland system with some forested land around it. And this area is actually designated as type 4 water. And then if we go back to Montauk, we already talked about this, but just to display it at the same scale and the same land use mapping. Here's the Montauk Golf Course, residential area, residential townhomes and condominiums, conserved tidally influenced wetlands, some more wetlands up here, and all of this is mapped as type 2. And the other important thing that shows up on this slide is across Mount Hope Bay in Bristol. This is the corner of Roger Williams University. And this area of type 2 was the last water type use change that changed the water type from type 1 to type 2.
So please describe to the subcommittee what occurred with the water type change at Roger Williams University, and please provide the date when that change occurred, please.
So again, we're going back to a 1972 aerial photograph that shows the university at that time. And the water type designation along this whole eastern shoreline was type 1. And then in 2013, by 2013, the university had expanded considerably. So they requested a petition similar to ours to change from type 1 water to type 2 in 2 areas of the shoreline, here and here. We look at similar land use mapping. So the university is essentially all mapped as institutional with some recreational fields here. And these are actually athletic fields over here. So these 2 areas were singled out for a type change so that the university could expand their learning platform dock and support their sailing program. What's really important here is if we go back to the 1972, the bulk of the university was down in the south part of the peninsula here, right by the Mount Hope Bridge. All or most of the expansion of the university was about a third of a mile inland up to Metacomet Avenue. So the shoreline, the immediate shoreline really didn't change. So the petition was based on the changes in land use up to a third of a mile away from the coast.
And that water type change was promulgated by CRMC in what year, Joe?
2013.
Thank you. Now, Joe, can you, you're back to Quidnessett, correct?
Yes.
And can you tell us approximately the length of the shoreline where the water type change is requested as compared to the length in linear feet to the Roger Williams request?
Yeah, this is about a third of a mile, I'd say 1,400 feet, if I'm doing the math backwards correctly. And it was between a quarter mile and a third of the mile at Roger Williams, about 1,200 linear feet in total. The southern one was 800 and some feet. The northern one was closer to 300 linear feet, if I remember.
Please go to the next slide. Thank you. So, Joe, we mentioned that there's a wall at Quidnessett now where there were those larger burritos installed that were subsequently washed out. And I want to talk about whether this water type classification proposed in the petition to take the waters from type 1 to type 2, if CRMC were to follow through on that petition and change the water type, would that automatically approve the wall?
No, it wouldn't approve the wall at all.
And why not?
Because an application, a category B application would have to be submitted for any structure on that section.
All right, and what's involved with that category B process?
Site plans would have to be developed, supporting documents that would get submitted to CRMC. And there would have to be a category B hearing in front of the full council with public, as part of the public hearing.
Thank you. And Joe, to wrap up and summarize the petition and the research that you've done, what are your summary points, please?
So I said at the beginning, there were three ways we're looking at this. First, we wanted to look at that type 1 designation. Is it natural and undisturbed? We looked at the aerial photographs and we had evidence of the bright sandy areas. Then we overlaid soil mapping on top of that. That was that UD Northing's urban mapping, cuts and fills to 2 feet. Then we looked at the adjacent mainland activities. Noted that we had residential, developed recreation, and residential institutional, and that's consistent with type 2. Then the third part of what the petition looked at was other examples around the bay. And we saw many areas with similar land uses, some even with more wetlands and conservation areas, and those were type 2.
Thank you. I have nothing further in Joe's presentation. Joe, you're done with your presentation? Okay, thank you.
Any questions of the witness from the committee members? Okay. Mr. Willis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got several questions, if you don't mind, just to follow up on some of the comments you guys made. The comments that the soil and the disturbance in the soil took place prior to 1971, you've made your case on that. Why, given that, do you think that water type was designated as type 1 when you claim that it should have been type 2?
I'm not sure about that.
The 200-foot contiguous area on a shoreline that has a water type, what can be done in the 200-foot contiguous area in type 2 waters that is similar or dissimilar to what can be done in type 1, the 200-foot contiguous area in type 1 waters?
In type 2, if the conditions prevailed, a dock could be built, let me say,
In the 200-foot contiguous area?
presumably additional buildings could be.
I'm sorry, could be what?
Additional buildings could be applied for.
That would be dependent on zoning. So in the 200-foot contiguous area, type 1 and type 2 waters, you can do the same thing. There's no difference in restrictions. It's the shoreline uses that are in play. So we've established you don't know why the council designated it type 1 back in the 70s when this program had policies on shoreline types and designated them low intensity conservation areas, high intensity, et cetera. And this shoreline was a conservation area in the 70 program, the one that was permitted by or approved by the feds. It was just in 1983 when the council actually put separating lines, if you will, line of sight, end of road extensions, et cetera, to designate where one designation begins, one designation might end. This was always a type 1 shoreline, even in the early iterations of the program as approved by NOAA back in the 70s. So given that, I don't know why now it's argued that it should have been type 2 when it's been this way for over 50 years.
Yeah, actually, in that plan that we're gonna. So in the 77, 78 program, type 1 included what we think of as type 2 today. So this area was actually type 4 in 1977. So the only type 1 was the Potawatomi estuary, and that's described very specifically in the program at that time. The only type 2 areas at that time were the Pettisquantrick River, the Kickamuit River, the Sakonnet River, and portions of some of the coastal lines. It hadn't split that low intensity use out of the conservation at that time.
I'm not going to address that right now. I think there's a lot of information that you've given us to look at, and I definitely would like to digest it all and come back with a staff report that discusses this in a lot more detail.
What we believe is significant here with this research Joe has done over many, many hours at the Pell Library is that green designation of Quidnessett back in the 1970s, and we showed you the corresponding aerials that showed the development of the 18-hole golf course in that area. And that green area goes along with recreational. And unfortunately, we can't get into the minds of those who were involved at the time in the 70s with the designation, and we don't want to speculate in answering the executive director's question about why was it designated as 1. But when we look at this mapping and then when we compare it to similar areas at Montauk and Warwick Country Club in particular, it does create a question why Quidnessett literally got stuck with type 1.
I actually appreciate that you brought that out, but that said, decisions were made back in the 70s that this should be a type 1 shoreline, those should be type 2. For all the information you've given, it was still designated type 1. So that's where we're at, and we've been operating under type 1 program policies for, like I said, over 50 years.
Yeah. And there's no disputing that at all. But when we did this research and looked at then the intensification of the uses in the 80s and the 90s, not only at Quidnessett, but also at Bayview, that adjacent land use, both at Quidnessett and Bayview, need to be evaluated against the water type classification.
That's an interesting comment. That Bayview is not Quidnessett property, so why would the water type designation need to go beyond the property bounds? It's not property that the country club owns.
No, it is not. Bayview supports the petition. Bayview would like the water type change. We have a representative from Bayview tonight who will speak for 5 minutes about it. But again, the water type is literally, as it sounds, the water in front of Bayview. And that's why that area was requested, because it's the water, not necessarily the Bayview, it's not the Bayview property. And we believe that it's appropriate to change the water type going farther to, I believe that's to the west, but Joe can correct, north. And again, Bayview supports.
But if I'm reading that map that's up on the chart now, on the presentation panel now, that those soils north of the country club and north of Bayview are the same. So shouldn't they be afforded a change at type 2 also? Why do they stop where they stop? Why does the northern line stop where it stops?
Because when we looked at the change through time, the significant changes were on the Bayview property. If we go north of there, it's a lower residential development that does not have this intensity of use. So it seemed appropriate to include Bayview, but not not further.
But if it's, like you said, residential, type 2 waters are associated with residential properties.
Correct. So it's a lower intensity use. So it seems like it could be type 1, type 2, somewhere in between. We don't have recreational activity, recreational development further north. So that's why we called it out the way we did.
But we certainly wouldn't object if you wanted to carry the water type change farther north.
Thanks.
Okay. Just adding.
Are you all set with this witness?
I am, with one request.
I did have a couple questions for the witness, if it's okay with the.
Yes, please.
I'm just trying to get a better handle on this definition of type 1. You know, as is defined, it's waters. Type 1's waters as those abutting shorelines in a natural undisturbed condition. And I know you presented evidence that, well, it's not a natural undisturbed condition, which would be true if the definition was land adjacent to the waters, but it says shoreline abutting the waters, which basically common definition in my experience has been right up on the water. So did you consider what the condition of the actual shoreline abutting the waters was in determining whether that shoreline was in a natural undisturbed condition?
Okay, on the Quidnessett property, it appears to us that the grading and the earthwork did actually extend to the shoreline. And some of the photographs, when you look closely, you can actually see vehicles. It appears they're actually going down to the beach as part of that grading. But I think one of the overriding definitions before we even get to the specific type 1, type 2 is that activities on the adjacent mainland are the primary determinant of the water use. So we're looking at that. It's not just the immediate shoreline, it's further inland. And the land use mapping that was the crazy color map from the late 70s that extended 1.5 miles to even 7.5 miles inland kind of corroborates that. And then when we looked at the Roger Williams water type change, the immediate shoreline didn't change from 1972 to even the present. Actually, some of the fields that were directly abutting the shoreline have now become forested. So that petition was based on things that were happening 1/3 of a mile inland up to Metacom Avenue.
And if I may add, Mr. Corbett, the language that Joe has in the top paragraph in quotes is from section 1.2.1 of the Red Book. That's the introductory paragraph to all the water type classifications.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions of the witness?
If I may. I know this isn't a hearing, but may I present the slides that Joe used during his presentations so that they're part of the record?
Well, you may, but if it's not a hearing, it's not really a record. This is part of the public presentation. You can distribute them to be used as a reference point for the rest of the presentation.
Would you like them for CRMC's files?
Bring them right along.
Okay,
We'll bring it on.
that's all. I'm not asking for them to
Want the
be,
rest of them?
you want all those
Yeah,
copies?
yeah.
We went to extra effort for this, so I'm going to give you all the copies.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking them. Yep. I'll call the next presenter, Mr. Tim Garish.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Yes, Timothy Garish, TIMOTYGERRISH.
Great. Tim, would you please tell the subcommittee very briefly about your education and professional background?
Yes, I'm a registered landscape architect, golf course architect based here in Providence, Rhode Island. I've been working over 25 years as a golf course architect. I'll tell you a little story. I started at graduate school at University of Massachusetts. One of the main reasons I went there, attended there, was because Mr. Jeffrey Cornish was associated with the university. He is the designer of Quidnessett. While I was a student, a graduate student, I started interning with him. After graduating, I worked full-time for his office. Mr. Cornish, fondly called Mr. Cornish, was a renowned golf course architect. I was very lucky to have the job. And you know, he wrote many books on the subject, historian, and I was his last associate.
Excellent. Thanks, Tim. And Tim, are you familiar with Quidnessett Country Club?
Yes,
And tell us how you're familiar with that country club.
yeah, over the last decade or so, I played in a couple tournaments there. The Rhode Island Superintendent's Association often will have a tournament there, which I played and actually was won this summer. And then I last visited Quidnessett was October of this year, preparation.
Thank you. And you talked about Mr. Cornish for a moment. What type of golf course did he design at Quidnessett?
Yeah, Quidnessett is a 1960, it was first built in late 1950s, right? 1959, the first 18 holes. And then it was redesigned using, redesigning at least 7 of the holes to create the back 9, where we've seen water where 13, 14, 15 is, right? That opened in 1974.
And if you look at the aerial that's up here, Tim, we used that during Joe's presentation. Are you familiar with that outline at all?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And what's that showing?
Yeah, Narragansett Narragansett Bay over here, and then you have the back 9, which is 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 returns back to the clubhouse.
And is there anything unique about Mr. Cornish's design of the golf course here at Quidnessett?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that it's the 1960s, 1970s golf course. It's the only course of that era on Narragansett Bay. Mr. Cornish designed multiple courses in Rhode Island, but this is the only one that he did on the bay, and minus a slight change with the 10th hole in relation to the condos and the practice facility. There's been no significant alterations or renovation work done.
So is it fair to say that the golf course is in substantially the same condition today or position today in 2024 as it was 40 to 45 years ago?
Yeah, players that play now are playing basically the same routing, the same golf course.
And are you aware of any coastal erosion issues at Quidnessett?
Yes, back when I originally testified, was that about a decade ago or so, time flies, sorry. That we were looking at the same situation along the 14th hole, 15th tees. And I know that's currently happening now, especially after seeing Joe's slides.
So there's erosion at the 14th hole and the 15th tee at Quidnessett, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And can Quidnessett just move the 14th hole in the 15th tee?
Yeah, I wish it was that easy, but it's not. And when you watch me go around the holes originally, you notice my hand kind of flowed from golf hole to golf hole. If we removed 14, there's no extra land on the property to put the golf hole. And then there would be a break. You'd be at 13th green and you'd have to get over here to 15T, which doesn't happen in golf course design. We really want you to play from green to the next tee, and so it's continuous. Even though it's an individual golf hole by itself, you're playing a flow and a pattern of golf holes.
And Tim, with your background as a golf course architect, if Quidnessett simply gave up on the 14th and 15th holes, what impact would that have on Quidnessett?
Yes, it would become a 17th hole or 16th hole golf course, which doesn't really exist in our society. There are 9-hole golf courses and there are 18-hole golf courses. And those are the golf courses that are predominantly what you find.
And you were here, sitting here for Joe's testimony over the past 45 minutes or so, correct? And did you hear him describe type 1 waters and the fact that type 1, at least in the definition that we showed, are along natural undisturbed lands? Did you hear that?
I did.
All right. Do you regard a golf course as natural and undisturbed?
Definitely not. Especially as a landscape architect, golf courses are outside of Japanese gardens, the most highly maintained landscape that we have. We generally will strip all the soil, topsoil out, redo massive regrading, as Joe's slide of the mine that was there, the sand and gravel pit. It entirely makes sense why Mr. Cornish was looking at this land as developing a golf course, because that's one of the prime reasons we look at what land becomes a golf course and what not is the soil structure and the soil related to that. And so, yeah.
Thank you very much. I have nothing further with Tim. Tim, you please stay with us for a moment. If there's any questions for
Any
you.
questions from
Just a
some of us?
couple, Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Garish, appreciate that. Are all golf courses built by disturbing the land?
Yes.
All of them?
Well, minus maybe the old course in St. Andrews. Since that time, and as a golf course architect, we love to say that we work with the land as much as possible. And this is very true. We try to work with the slopes and the terrain to minimize that construction process, to make the course connect and flow with the landscape in its entirety. But it's hard nowadays. I mean, even if you were to go to abandoned dunes and the new courses in Wisconsin by some famous architects, that there is a removal of material and there's the shaping of the ground. And then there's significant irrigation and drainage and topsoiling. It's significant. And then, of course, vegetating it with turf grass. If you're a golfer, you know, named Pete Dye was a famous golf course architect. He said he never walked through the woods and found a golf hole. We have to create that.
If there was opportunity to purchase land nearby, is that something to address the issue of what's happening on the 14th hole?
What is true, I mean, I guess everything would be possible. You would be changing the nature of this mid-century golf course design. It's the only one in Rhode Island that's on the bay. I would argue it's probably the best mid-century golf course in Rhode Island. People might say Kirkbray's, but I would argue that because Kirkbray's changed, right? All the rest of the golf courses on the bay are from the golden age, 1920s, 1930s. It's like comparing Frank Lloyd Wright and I.M. Pei, right? Regional designers, you have something done by a very well-known golf course architect in Rhode Island. It's the only one, and it hasn't been significantly changed.
Thank you.
That would be Donald Ross, maybe,
Yes, Donald Ross did Warwick, right?
but
Rhode Island Country Club.
he never moved land around. He just used what was there. I think,
A little bit.
good guy. Well, okay.
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And our last presenter is Mr. Abe Cohen from Bayview at Scalabrini.
Please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Abraham Cohen, ABRAHAMCOHEN.
Thanks, Abe. So we've already established that your work includes Bayview at Scalabrini, correct?
Yes,
All right, what company do you work for, Abe?
I work for a company called Marquee Health Consulting Services. We oversee and consult 7 skilled nursing facilities in the state. Bayview is one of our, if not the most beautiful of all the 7.
Speaking of which, if you turn around, is that a picture of at least part of Bayview at Scalabrini?
Yes, much nicer in high definition, but yes, that is our facility.
And that facility is along there against the bay, you can see that in the top right, correct?
Correct.
And next to the golf course, correct?
Stone's throw.
And in the foreground, do you see a building there?
in the foreground.
Yes, right,
I see a building here and a building.
yes.
Yes.
Tell me about those two buildings, if you know about them.
Yes, this is the original building. It's only a part of it. That is where the Children's Hospital used to be, before it was a skilled nursing facility. This is where I believe the the church and the father and Scalabrini fathers would reside in that house over there. And this was the original structure on the property for children with polio.
Thank you. So, tell the subcommittee what your role is with the Marquee Company, please.
Sure. I'm the Vice President of Business Development. My role is to oversee all network development, development with our community at large, and of course, a heavy focus on our hospital partners, with whom we do a tremendous amount of work and business with.
All right, do you have any hospital partners in Rhode Island?
Yes, every single one. Most importantly, specific to Bayview would be Kent Hospital from Care New England, as well as South County Hospital.
Right. And tell me how Bayview is used today. I know you mentioned the hospital for children with polio, and these buildings date back, the smaller buildings date back to that era. But what about the larger building that we saw that Joe pointed out earlier? What is that used for?
This one?
Yes.
Yes. So this is Bayview today. The entire structure is a 120 skilled nursing facility licensed bed structure, where we provide both long-term care and short-term rehabilitation to our most vulnerable population. Any patient with any sort of rehabilitative need for short-term does come to us, as well as a strong long-term population for our residents who live there long-term.
Thank you. And Abe, are you familiar with the petition that Quidnessett has filed for a water type change from type 1 to type 2 that extends in front of the Bayview facility you were just discussing?
I am.
And does Bayview support that petition?
Absolutely.
And are you familiar with a letter that Armani Sepe from Bayview wrote to the Coastal Resources Management Council several months ago? Are you familiar with that letter?
I am.
All right. Have you read that letter?
I have.
All right. And
Nighttime reading.
true. I'll put that on my list. And does Bayview continue to stand by Mr. Sepe's letter in support of the petition?
We absolutely do.
Thank you. I have no further presentation with Mr. Cohen.
Can I just add one quick thought?
Sure.
If that would be okay with the board, subcommittee.
If your council wants to ask you a question,
No, go ahead, Abe.
I just wanted to, if it had not been mentioned, and just really reiterate that it's a beautiful kind of circle of life. Beginning with the Children's Hospital back in the day, where we've heard stories from, I guess, that were passed from administration to administration to administration, because we are fairly new in comparable to the years that we're discussing here, of the children who had polio, unfortunately, and water was a very therapeutic part of their daily activities, and they would wheel the children out to the bay to be able to have some level of water therapy. And then fast forward to today's day and age, we're not wheeling our patients out into the water. We'd probably get shut down if that were the case, but it is a beautiful kind of circle of life, if you will, where today we're really a tremendous part of the community at large. There isn't a family that I'm aware of that doesn't live in the North Kingstown area that, when you mentioned Bayview, either had a loved one or knew a loved one or had a family friend or a loved one that that frequented the facility for either short-term or long-term care. So just wanted to further state and support that we're behind this 100%.
And with the comments that you've just made, for many decades, then this area Scalabrini and Bayview have been giving care to the community, again, for many decades.
100%.
Does that conclude your presentation?
It concludes the three presenters, and then if I may make some closing comments.
Sure.
Thank you, Abe. So again, I would like to thank CRMC staff, the executive director, committee members, and the attorneys for their time today and allowing us to make this presentation and to bring forward these three presenters to your attention. And we ask that the subcommittee recommend to the full council that this petition for the water type change from type 1 to type 2 be recommended for that regulatory change. And we've talked a lot tonight about the regulatory platform that we're looking at right now. And Mr. Horbert's questions really went to the essence of that. And I want to emphasize that portion of the Red Book. And Joe did that a few moments ago, that talks about the water type classifications being based on the adjacent mainland activities. And we showed through the historic aerials going back to the early 1960s, plus the presentations by Mr. Klinger, Mr. Garish, and Mr. Cohen, that this area of Quidnessett and then to Bayview at Scalabrini have been used in a way that has not been in a natural undisturbed state. And that goes back decades. I mean, you just heard about the hospital facilities with kids with polio. You saw the outline of the golf course evolve from 1959 forward. That is not in a natural and undisturbed condition to support type 1. That area should have never been type 1. It should always have been type 2. And as you heard with Mr. Klinger's presentation about the subsequent work at Quidnessett and the aerials that he showed from the 1980s and into the 2000s, that adjacent mainland activity only intensified with use over time, but it was a use that was compatible with what always was going on there back into the 1960s. So the intensification of use, just going back to what Abe just described, was this larger facility at Bayview for skilled nursing care. And then going down to Quidnessett, it's the clubhouse, it's the condominiums, and it's that intensification of use. Again, just increasing and compatible with the original uses that all support a type 2 designation here, not a type 1. And I want to take a step back for a moment and bring something that is, I think, important to the subcommittee's attention. The CRMC staff put together their staff report on this matter. And one of the things that was brought out was an open space easement at Quidnessett. And I want to address that for a moment, because the open space easement for Quidnessett came about when Quidnessett was doing additional development on the site, that intensification of use that I was just speaking about. And when they were before the town of North Kingstown and Quidnessett decided that this open space easement would be put on the property. The important thing to know about this open space easement is it doesn't suddenly put a blanket of natural undisturbed conditions on the property. In fact, to the contrary, the open space easement not only acknowledges the development that's already there with the golf course and the clubhouse and the sheds for the golf carts and so forth, but it also allows Quidnessett to put in additional structures if the town approves it. So it wasn't like the town just said, freeze and place your open space. The easement recognizes that there is disturbance here. And if you're going to do more, you got to come back to us, folks. And what's also important to know about that open space issue, and certainly the staff wouldn't have any reason to know about this, there's actually a Superior Court case that Judge Thompson decided just before she went on the federal First Circuit bench, and the case is called Quidnessett Country Club, Inc. versus Board of Assessment Review. It's a 2008 case, and it can be found at 2008 Rhode Island Super, Lexus, page 112. And I don't want to drag you into the weeds on that case, but essentially it was a tax dispute. And Quidnessett appealed from the tax assessor's decision in North Kingstown to Superior Court saying, hey, we've got this open space. We want to take some tax credit associated with it. And the court, again, Judge Thompson, importantly said here, no. I am upholding the North Kingstown tax assessor. And in the decision, it states on, it looks like the 21st page of the decision, the fairways, landscaping, and roadways on a golf course are brought about by careful human planning. A golf course does not arise spontaneously in nature. Again, almost echoing what Tim Garish described a few moments ago. Certainly not natural, undisturbed land that a type 1 designation would support. And the court, in concluding on its decision, said Quidnessett's property as a whole does not qualify as open space land because it is neither undeveloped land serving to enhance agricultural value, nor land in its natural state. So there's many areas of support that we have provided you tonight. Factually, this is a fact-driven presentation. We wanted to bring you a fact-driven presentation based on the primary source materials that Joe researched at the Pell Library, the many different errors shown with the aerials, and also the work that URI and CRMC was doing on water type classifications. And importantly, those comparisons to Montauk and Warwick Country Club, just to name a few, which show type 2 land. To say, and going back to the executive director's question, in our opinion, this should have always been type 2. Why it's type 1, I can't answer that. Joe can't answer that. If anybody tried to answer that based on what we've seen so far, it would be speculation, and we would never do that in front of this council or any other body. But the facts, if you look at the facts, they support the type 2. And this council, this is why we're requesting that the subcommittee recommend the water type change to the full council. The council periodically has recognized, like with the Roger Williams University example, when water types need to be changed. And we believe that those water types need to be changed here. And I want to conclude with this. We are not here tonight seeking an automatic approval of whatever has gone on at Quidnessett. We're looking to get a water type change so that we can then evaluate the next steps. Because we believe, and we have shown, that the water type should be type 2. But going back to something the executive director mentioned, and I think it's a valuable point, we're seeking the water type change because, in our opinion, it's obvious it should be changed at Quidnessett and going up to Bayview. But we're also mindful of what may be going on at CRMC and people thinking, hey, you know, what's the next thing? Are you going to put in, for example, a dock? And I will certainly stipulate today on behalf of Quidnessett that that is not something that we would do, and we will stipulate to that. We will not seek that. I think the water type should have been type 2 all along. And in fact, I will say the facts bear that out. The facts that we brought you tonight bear that out. So again, we respectfully request that this subcommittee recommend to the full council the water type change based on these facts that we brought to you tonight and in our earlier papers, and make that change from type 1 to type 2 for the Quidnessett Bayview area. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I have a question of Mr. Lofgren. You've heard 3 witnesses this evening. You've heard some arguments made by the attorney from the applicant Quidnessett. I know at the last hearing, you gave an extensive report and opinion based on your studies of the area and whatever else that you had that you considered. Has anything that you heard this evening or that was presented this evening changed your opinion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think what Director Willis said earlier was that we would like the opportunity to digest this new information and possibly come back another time to better answer that question after we've had a chance to digest it. But with that caveat, based on everything I've heard tonight, I think that staff would stand by its recommendation that it gave at the last meeting, recommending that the subcommittee deny the application. And that was based on we recommended denial for 3 reasons. We felt that we provided facts that showed that the current designation of type 1 was appropriate for the shoreline. We felt that we presented facts that it was inconsistent with coastal planning mandated by CRMC's enabling legislation and state regulations contained in the Red Book as adopted in 1983. We also felt that we provided facts and we recommend denial because of the potential negative impacts to public shoreline lateral access, coastal habitat, and marine resources. And nothing I heard tonight would change my opinion on those 3 recommendations.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members of Mr. Lofgren as it relates to statements he just made? Yes, Mr. Horbert.
Thank you, Mr. Lofgren. Although first, I'd like to thank Attorney Main for acknowledging that I might have gotten the heart of the situation. I don't know exactly if that's how you put it in our discussion or Joe and I's discussion on adjacent versus abutting. But Mr. Lofgren, do you have the report? Do you have your staff report in front of you?
I do.
I'm just looking at section 6.3. 6.3.1, where you go into the discussion of the geographic link between the shoreline characteristics and water type classifications. My understanding of Mr. Klinger's testimony was that the adjacent land use was a primary determinant of the water type classifications, and that, that was, and because of that, really the development or the character of the property being developed should have been a determinant in considering it to be type 2. But in reading your report here, that isn't really what that is saying, true?
Well, yes, that is correct. I mean, our interpretation and our opinion is that the 200-foot contiguous area is the geographic extent to which water type qualifications influence mainland uses. Anything beyond that It doesn't
Right.
influence the water type.
So you specifically quoted the rule, section 1.2.1A, where it said that the categories of waters defined in this program are directly linked to the characteristics of the shoreline. Since the activities on the adjacent mainland are the primary determinant of the uses and qualities of any specific water site, and you added that emphasis. In reading that, to me, that's saying, well, that's definitely true, but it's not a determinant of what the water type is, because the water type is defined elsewhere. Is defined based on the abutting shoreline with the additional caveats or determinants of whether it's adjacent to conservation land or whether it I can't remember what the other three were, what the other two were, but that there are other factors in determining what would be a type 1 water. Conservation areas, waters that would had exposure to severe wave action or had retained natural habitat at that immediately abutting shoreline. Am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, that sounds to be accurate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any other questions.
Any questions, Mr. Gomez?
Just there, we had mentioned that there are alternatives to, protecting the shoreline there. And obviously, I guess we haven't addressed those, but it does probably play into the equation also. They are getting a lot of erosion moving into the golf course, and that takes the 200 feet and that pushes that back 40-some feet or whatever it is. So looks like, something needs to be done, but there were alternatives, as we discussed at a previous meeting, that could be employed to prevent that erosion.
Yeah, that is what Kevin Sloan mentioned at the last meeting, but in terms of the policy and the water type change,
Yeah, I
it's
understand.
difficult to talk about alternatives here because we're talking about the water type. And you mentioned erosion. So one of the key, indicators of a type 1 shoreline is water areas that are particularly unsuitable for structures due to their exposure to severe wave action, flooding, and erosion.
Thank you.
Is the committee in a posture for a motion?
For what?
No, it concludes the presentation by Quidnessett concludes the evidence that's coming before us on our committee, the PMP committee. Are you in a position to?
Whether we should move this forward or not? Is that the petition you're looking for?
Well, I would ask Attorney DeSisto then just to again remind the committee members what the application is and what the motion would be.
Before you is a petition to change the water type, has been shown here. That's what it is, to from type 1 to type 2. The purpose of the subcommittee is to make a recommendation to the full council on this as part of the rulemaking process. So the question is whether or not
We recommend type 1.
whether or not you recommend that the petition be granted by the council, or whether or not you recommend that the petition be denied by the council, which is what staff has recommended.
I would then move that the petition be denied by the council.
Is that based on staff report and also what you've heard at the
Previous meeting, staff report, discussions there, and then what we heard tonight, which was actually a very good presentation, but I think there were some other factors and some of the comparisons to other areas had a lot of errors in with things like the boat dock that got increased up in Bristol, and just they're they're not easily compared. What we did there was a whole different reason on what we would do here, and I think that this water needs to remain type 1.
Is there a second?
I will second that motion.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I will poll the committee members. Mr. Gomez,
I,
Mr. Horvath,
Aye.
I too vote aye on the application before us. Thank you for your presentation.
This is a procedure. This will be taken up by the full council with the recommendation to deny the petition, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna score that.
Did you go down to Boston?
My brother was a golf pro. Incredible. And his,
Can we get this?
the golf club is run by Donald Ross. Donald Ross moved down south. The old forward of the club's Donald Ross. And he always used.
Oh, no, I just entertain a motion to adjourn.
So,
2 minutes second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Subcommittee is adjourned. Thank you, Ryan.